That will be probably the biggest task ahead, to kind of undo the gradual sort of colonization of the Hungarian state by the Fidesz party and by Orbán loyalists. And it's true of the public administration, but it's also true of the media, it's true of the courts, it's true of just many layers of sort of political power, sometimes subtle, soft power in Hungary. And so I think that is actually not a task for 4 years. I think that's more of a sort of generational challenge to sort of see how Hungary can deal with that legacy.
Hello and welcome to Independent Savening Media. I'm Kartlos Arashenicen. After 16 years in power, Viktor Orbán has lost Hungary's parliamentary elections. To discuss what this means for Hungary, the region and beyond, I'm joined by Dalibor Rohac, a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Rohac, first of all, thank you so much for your time for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And let me start with the big picture. After the 16 years in power, what do you think ultimately made it possible to unseat Viktor Orbán?
I think it was a combination of two factors. The first one was his actual track record as prime minister. For 16 years, Hungary has been moving from one of the most successful post-communist economies to a position of being one of the poorest member states in the EU. It is currently ranked by Transparency International as the most corrupt country in the European Union. It is a country that has lost several hundreds of thousands of people, both to emigration and to population aging. It's a country where really very little has been delivered in terms of tangible improvements in the quality of life, in the quality of public services, and I think that has fueled popular discontent. At the same time, the rise of Péter Magyar and of his Tisza party provided a new avenue for the opposition to mobilize and for people to be able to peel away from the base of the Fidesz party towards an appealing center-right alternative. Hungary saw efforts at unifying the opposition before. Those were not successful. I think it required the right sort of leadership, but it also required the right sort of messaging, and Tisza and Péter Magyar delivered both of those.
Yeah, could you please help us understand Péter Magyar as a leader? So he was insider, Fidesz insider until just 2 years ago, right? So does his background make him better equipped to undo what Orbán built, or does it raise some questions about how far the changes will actually go?
I suppose we'll have to wait and see about the actual results. Péter Magyar is somebody who, as you said, is coming from the world of the Fidesz party itself, somebody who is actually coming from a political family. So he is a relative of one of Hungary's former presidents. He was the husband of the justice minister in the Fidesz government, who resigned in disgrace in a scandal that involved presidential pardons to people who were involved in cover-ups of sex abuse taking place in one of the government-run orphanages. So he, as a Fidesz member, had a reputation for kind of being difficult and complaining all the time and not really being happy with the way the country was moving. In 2024, he decided for a radical break on the back of his wife's scandal, essentially, or his ex-wife's scandal. And he built this center-right alternative, borrowing from Fidesz's vocabulary. So he's a center-right figure. He is somebody who does not hide a sort of patriotic sentiments. He's not a European federalist. He might say Eurosceptic things at times. He would even say things that are critical of Ukraine and of Ukraine's rapid EU accession. But that has allowed him to compete effectively on Fidesz's own playing field, and he has done so quite successfully. I think at the same time he's been also watching the examples of other countries that have been dealing with legacies of authoritarian rule, especially Poland. And I think he will be trying to learn from the example of the current Tusk government to design the sort of reforms that Poland needs. It helps that he now enjoys a constitutional majority in Hungary's parliament. That way he can actually pull off some of the measures that would otherwise be elusive. And so he'll be able to kind of clean house. Of course, that carries its own risks. But I think he's in a very good starting position relative to what most observers expected.
Yeah, what are your expectations? What actually will change in the Hungarian system after this, the Orban era, in practical terms? And what do you expect to stay in place from the last 16 years, at least?
Well, in very very practical terms, Hungary will practically immediately stop being a troublemaker in the EU. I think Mr. Magyar signaled very clearly that he wants Hungary to be a constructive stakeholder. Doesn't mean saying yes to everything, saying yes to every European initiative, but the sort of bargaining that we saw with Mr. Orbán, where he was trying to extract concessions from the EU in exchange for support to unrelated causes, whether they had to do with Ukraine or sanctions against Russia. I think those sort of blackmail practices will cease. So I think that's an important change for the EU. I think he'll try to repair the regional partnerships, regional alliances, especially the link between Budapest and Warsaw. Domestically, he'll face a worsening economic situation. So even before the war in Iran, Hungary had a lingering inflation problem that was getting worse. It has a substantial public debt that's getting worse. The Orbán government was making no effort to put Hungary's public finances on a more sustainable path. So I think there'll be some firefighting involved in these first months in office. There's also, not to make things too complicated, but there is also a quasi-independent budget office in Hungary that has the power to override political decisions over public spending under certain circumstances. That budget office is staffed by Fidesz loyalists, as is everything else in Hungary, and so that will be probably the biggest task ahead, to kind of undo the gradual sort of colonization of the Hungarian state by the Fidesz party and by Orbán loyalists. And it's true of the public administration, but it's also true of the media, it's true of the courts, it's true of just many layers of sort of political power, sometimes subtle soft power in Hungary. And so I think that is actually not a task for 4 years. I think that's more of a sort of generational challenge to sort of see how Hungary can deal with that legacy. But I think that is very high on his list of priorities.
You mentioned the European Union. Could you tell us more about your expectations? Like, what does this change mean for how Hungary shows up in the EU, on Ukrainian funding, on sanctions? How quickly do you expect these changes to come?
I think these changes will come pretty quickly. So on the EU side, I think there'll be a lot of willingness to help Magyar get off to a good start. So all of these funds that have been frozen, I think they will get unfrozen pretty quickly, and there might even be a kind of turning a blind eye turning a closed eye to maybe some of the questionable practices that might continue in the new government. I think everybody wants Mr. Magyar to succeed. Everybody wants to kind of help him in this sense. So that's an almost immediate effect. And Mr. Magyar also signaled that the ongoing Hungarian veto or obstruction over the 90 billion loan for Ukraine will be lifted, so Kyiv can expect those funds to start flowing. I think by and large, Hungary will might not become a leader on the Ukraine dossier, but it will certainly be a constructive voice. That doesn't mean again saying yes to everything, and especially the question of Ukraine's EU accession is a controversial question in Hungary, as it is in Poland, by the way. And so there'll be complicated politics around that issue, but I think it just moves Hungary into a qualitatively different place than where it was before, where everybody kind of assumed always the worst of the Hungarian government, whether it was leaking information to Moscow or just using anything as a cudgel to extract concessions from Brussels. I think that will stop. And Mr. Magyar himself has every incentive to try to rebuild trust and to end this period during which Hungary was kind of the problem child of Europe.
Yeah, on Ukraine, Magyar has said that settling the rights of the Hungarian minorities in Ukraine will be a precondition for rebuilding ties with Kiev. So how do you read this statement?
I mean, that is something that's been just extraordinarily consistent between different Hungarian governments of different ideological stripes. There's a large number of ethnic Hungarians living outside of Hungary. It has always affected Hungary's relations with its neighbors, be it Slovakia, be it Romania, Serbia, or Ukraine. And this is something that, it will sort of continue to sort of cast a shadow. I don't think it's something that will kind of override everything else. And I think Ukrainians themselves, I think they'll be perfectly fine dealing with kind of reasonable demands coming from Budapest. The problem with Viktor Orbán was that he was using these issues, this question of ethnic minorities and language rights, as a pretext for I suppose, darker agenda, an agenda that was actually serving Mr. Putin and Moscow.
Yeah, let me ask you about the U.S. So why was Washington so visibly invested in an Orban win, the president, the vice president, secretary of state? So what was the U.S. interest?
I mean, it is puzzling on the one hand because Viktor Orbán's Hungary was not particularly well aligned with U.S. interests in Europe. It was a country that was working very closely with Russia, it was working very closely with China. It is a destination for massive Chinese investment. It also nurtured very weird, very sort of strange ties with Iran over the years. Viktor Orbán visited Tehran in 2015. There have been very kind of lively contacts. Hungary is a home to thousands of Iranian students. As the only place in the EU, there were efforts to kind of deepen cooperation on the non-sanctioned kind of matters, especially in business. So it certainly wasn't the case that Hungary was kind of doing Washington's bidding in Europe. However, Viktor Orbán's Hungary presented a particular face to conservative Washington, to Republican Washington, by presenting itself as a bulwark of traditional values, of social conservatism, of being a bulwark against mass migration. It was kind of, in many cases, kind of recycling talking points that it sort of overheard at CPAC conferences. And you see, by the way, the same rhetoric now coming from Tbilisi and from the Georgian Dream government. They talk about the deep state, about kind of some sort of global left-wing conspiracy led by George Soros, etc., etc. So that was something that Hungarians really invested in, and they spent serious money building connections with the far-right elements within the Republican Party, with the MAGA movement, the likes of the Heritage Foundation and other groups. And so there have been these kind of ideological affinities that existed, which I think were completely at odds with US interest in Europe. But those affinities explain more than anything else the strange commitment that the Trump administration had to Viktor Orbán's success.
Yeah, you just mentioned Georgia, and like a few months ago you wrote that Georgia's ruling party, Georgian Dream, was trying to follow this Orbán's playbook, right? So now that Orbán is no longer in power, what does this mean for Georgian Dream and for Georgia?
So Georgia, I think one kind of immediate effect is that the Georgian Dream has lost its most important ally in the EU. So there's a lot of kind of like cheerleading that Orbán was doing for the Georgian Dream government, trying to open doors. He didn't have that much leverage or influence in the EU, but the sort of pretext of the accession process going on was something that was sort of pushed by the Orbán government. I mean, there is still Slovakia. The Georgian president recently visited Bratislava, and there are ties between the Fico government and Georgian Dream, but Fico is really a marginal player and somebody who, I mean, faces a very uncertain political future in his own country. So it's questionable how can Georgian Dream keep pretending that it is nurturing some relations with Europe when it has basically lost all its European interlocutors. And I mean, perhaps that will mean that the MAGA movement will now try making inroads with Georgian Dream. I mean, that's all very speculative. I think both the MAGA movement and the Kremlin will try to look for other partners once they can't count on Budapest. But whether Georgia is important enough to play the role, I think that's far from obvious.
Yeah, and this is my very last question, like kind of general question. If this is more than just Hungarian story, so where do you expect the biggest impact to be felt first?
Well, I think the biggest impact will be in Hungary's immediate neighborhood. So Mr. Magyar and Donald Tusk, I think we'll be working very closely together to repair that tandem that once existed between Budapest and Warsaw. The Czechs, Slovaks, I think they will follow eventually. I mean, I don't think Andrej Babiš has the same sort of ideological commitments that Orbán had. Mr. Fico might be on his way out. He might also not be as relevant a player. So I think it will reshape the region. It will reshape the perceptions of the region in the West. My hope is that this part of Europe will, again, like stop being a problem child, ungrateful kind of orphan who wandered into European institutions and NATO, but a real policy engine. Whether it's defense, whether it's infrastructure. I mean, you look at the defense industrial base of Poland. You look at some of these joint ventures set up by the likes of Rheinmetall in Hungary to produce light infantry vehicles. So this could really be part of the backbone of the European defense industrial base going forward. Needs investment into infrastructure, needs really kind of bring these economies up to speed with the West. I expect Poland to lead that effort. But I think we are perhaps for the first time in years looking in a much more hopeful way at the future of the region.